Masuma Kataoka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Homeland Chief Kristi Noem terminates Harvard student visa program, accusing the university of anti-Semitism and Chinese Communist Party ties. Harvard calls the move illegal and vows to defend its foreign students, as Noem warns other universities may be next. Israel allows limited aid into Gaza for the first time in weeks, but Palestinian officials say it's nowhere near enough as starvation looms and looting fears grow. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes kill at least 50 as Netanyahu signals no halt to the war unless hostages are returned. Chicago-born Elias Rodriguez is charged with first-degree murder after allegedly killing 2 Israeli embassy staff in D.C. in what officials call an anti-Semitic attack. Prosecutors say he opened fire outside a Jewish event attended by diplomats and young professionals. Israel says it shot down 2 missiles fired by Yemen's Houthis, triggering sirens nationwide, including in Jerusalem and the West Bank. The Houthis claim they targeted Ben Gurion Airport and Tel Aviv with missiles and drones in a fresh escalation. Iran says the US would be legally responsible for any Israeli attack on its nuclear sites and would be treated as a direct participant. Tehran's foreign minister vows a decisive response to any threat as tensions escalate over reported strike plans. A man is found dead in a flooded car as torrential rains battered southeast Australia, raising the death toll to 4. Nearly 50,000 people remain stranded as floods disrupt trains, flights, and whole towns across Sydney. Washington says Sudan's government used chemical weapons in 2024, prompting sanctions to begin next month, including export restrictions and credit bans. The move escalates pressure amid a brutal civil war, with the US also accusing RSF militants of genocide and linking chlorine gas use to army forces. North Korea launches a full investigation after a warship tipped during launch, damaging its hull and letting seawater flood the stern. Kim Jong-un calls the incident a criminal act as officials detain the shipyard manager and blame inexperience with large vessels. A Chicago-born man, Elias Rodriguez, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the fatal shooting of 2 Israeli embassy employees in Washington, D.C. Rodriguez, who claimed responsibility for the killings, told police he acted for Palestine and was heard chanting "Free Palestine" after his arrest. Federal prosecutors have described the case as death penalty eligible, condemning the attack as an act of anti-Semitism. Interim U.S. Attorney Jenny Pirro addressed the severity of the case as she stated that her office is investigating the shooting as a hate crime and a crime of terrorism in a news briefing. Let's listen into what she said.
31-year-old Elias Rodriguez of Chicago, Illinois, is now charged by complaint after his initial appearance before U.S. Magistrate Judge Matthew Sharbaugh with the following: murder in the first degree for the murder of 30-year-old Yaron Levshinsky, a foreign official and official guest of the United States. Mr. Levshinsky was here on official business for the State of Israel. The defendant Rodriguez is also charged with 2 counts of murder in the first degree for both Yaron Levshinsky along with 26-year-old Sarah Lynn Milgram of Kansas. In addition, there are several felony firearms charges for discharging a firearm in the middle of a violent crime and for causing the death of an individual through the use of that firearm.
The White House press secretary also shared the administration's deep sorrow and outrage over the tragic killings. She echoed President Trump's sentiments, reaffirming that the full force of the law would be brought to bear on the perpetrator. Let's listen to what she had to say.
The evil of anti-Semitism must be eradicated from our society. I spoke to the Attorney General this morning. The Department of Justice will be prosecuting the perpetrator responsible for this to the fullest extent of the law. Hatred has no place in the United States of America under President Donald Trump. Everyone here at the White House is praying for the victims' friends and families during this unimaginable.
Prime Minister Mark Carney expressed being devastated and appalled by the tragic killing of 2 Israeli diplomats in Washington. Meanwhile, Qatar, a key mediator in the Israel-Hamas conflict, has also condemned the attack. In a statement, the Qatari Foreign Ministry denounced the shooting outside the Jewish Museum. The ministry extended the state's condolences to the victims' families and reaffirmed Qatar's rejection of violence in all its forms. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has strongly condemned the horrific killing. Netanyahu also took the opportunity to thank President Trump for his unwavering support of Israel in the wake of this tragedy. In his statement, Netanyahu also accused leaders from France, Britain, and Canada of emboldening Hamas militants, suggesting that their condemnation of Israel's recent escalation in Gaza has only strengthened the terrorist group's resolve. Let's hear what Netanyahu had to say.
I could never understand how this simple truth evades the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, and others. They're now proposing to establish a Palestinian state and reward these murderers with the ultimate prize. Well, for 18 years, we had a de facto Palestinian state. It's called Gaza. And what did we get? Peace? No. We got the most savage slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust.
Hello, we have Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, joining us from Vigan, Philippines. Professor, who is Elias Rodriguez and what charges has he been filed with?
Thanks for having me on. Not much is known about this person. I do not wish to say his name on the air in order to try to allow him to get notoriety, which is what he obviously craves. This is a despicable crime, and this individual will be, no doubt, charged with and tried, and if he's found guilty, he will be sentenced. And this is why it is so important for the United States and other nations to continue to maintain the basic core rights of due process. In our country, in the United States, we cannot just simply arrest someone and throw him into jail. The person is subject to being charged and will be allowed to adduce evidence before the court. The jury will determine the facts, the judge will determine the law, and the verdict will be delivered according to the law. So in terms of this particular person, I really don't know much about him, except for the fact that he's allegedly committed a very heinous crime.
Thank you for sharing that insight. And what were the circumstances of the shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum?
Well, again, the news was just coming in this morning as I was, getting up in this part of the world. It seems that there was this event. The shooter, the person who's been charged, was apparently lurking around. He spotted the victims. I don't know how he was able to ascertain his targets, and we will find out as and when the state presents its case before the court.
And why is this case being investigated as a hate crime and as an act of terrorism?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. Well, he's obviously targeted 2 individuals who are either employed by or associated with the Israeli embassy, who are Jewish, and of course his remarks, which were reported on the news, suggest that his motivations were political, and therefore it is most likely a hate crime and most likely terrorism.
And how have the victims been identified, and what impact has this incident had on the community?
I don't know. I can't say. I can only imagine that this will be devastating for the Israeli diplomatic staff in Washington, D.C., and it will have a shocking and traumatic effect on the wider Jewish community.
Thank you, Professor, for joining us, and we move on to our next story. The Trump administration has revoked Harvard University's right to enroll foreign students, affecting over a quarter of its annual intake and escalating tensions with the prestigious Ivy League institution. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced the immediate withdrawal of Harvard's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification, the system permitting international students to study in the U.S. This move follows Harvard's refusal to comply with government's demands for oversight on admissions and hiring amid President Trump's accusations that the university fosters anti-Semitism, supports pro-Hamas views, and promotes divisive woke policies. Trump had previously warned of such actions if Harvard resisted government supervision. Harvard enrolled more than 27% of foreign students in the 2024 to 2025 academic year. Noem stated that maintaining foreign student enrollment is a privilege contingent on compliance with Department of Homeland Security regulations. Harvard has yet to respond to requests for comment. Meanwhile, Kristi Noem says the Trump administration is considering similar actions against other universities after blocking Harvard from enrolling foreign students. She made the remarks in a Fox News interview, signaling a broader crackdown on institutions resisting federal oversight. We have Professor Jim Rice again joining us from Vigan, Philippines. Thank you for staying with us. So why did the Trump administration revoke Harvard's ability to enroll international students?
Well, I think your excellent introduction basically said it all. The Trump administration, and in the form of the Department of Homeland Security, has taken it upon themselves to interfere with one of the greatest aspects of American life, which is academic freedom and institutional autonomy. Harvard is one of the best universities in the world, and the United States system of universities is probably the best in the world. And the reason that it's so good is because for the past 250 years, the system, the universities, the academics have enjoyed academic freedom. And what the Trump administration is obviously trying to do is to try and put a freeze on academic freedom, to try and impose their will over what professors are allowed to teach, what professors are allowed to be hired, what professors are get tenure, and what professors get fired. This is an absolutely appalling action by the Trump administration, and it will be struck down by the courts.
And building on the point that you mentioned, how prestigious is Harvard's history, Harvard's reputation, how do you think this will impact Harvard's reputation for its future, and how might this decision affect Harvard's operations?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. As you probably know, at the beginning of the Trump administration, they demanded a similar kind of interference over Columbia University, and the threat was to cut off funding. Sadly, Columbia complied, thinking that this would get the Trump administration off their backs. But of course, it didn't, and they demanded more. When they came for Harvard, Harvard refused to comply, and Harvard fought back. So to try and answer your really excellent question, I'm quite sure that Harvard is not going to comply, that the professors, the administration, And the students of Harvard University will not buckle to this illegal interference in really what amounts to the First Amendment of the US Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of expression.
And last but not least, what could be the broader impact on all the international students who are studying now in US and who were supposed to be going to US to study abroad?
Again, speaking for myself as a former international student, this is just devastating. I was truly shocked when I first read the news this morning. I just thought it was a joke. But to answer your question, these students from Harvard will be forced to find other universities in the US if this goes through, or they'll be forced to return to their countries. However, I take some comfort in knowing that this unilateral order by the Trump administration will not stand in front of a court of law.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Jim Rice. And we move on to our next story. Multiple deaths have been reported following a fiery plane crash in a San Diego neighborhood, with at least 6 fatalities reported, through the exact death toll has not been confirmed. A Cessna 550 has crashed into the residential area, causing massive destruction. Debris from the wreckage hit at least 10 homes, while vehicles lining the street were engulfed in flames. The crash, which occurred in a neighborhood home to military families, sent burning jet fuel across the area. San Diego Fire Department Assistant Chief Dan Eddy reported that one house had been severely damaged, but fortunately no one on the ground suffered serious injuries. Authorities are still working to determine the full scope of this incident. Let's listen into what he has said further.
It's accurate that multiple people believe we have multiple fatalities. From what we've found so far and seen, we do believe we have multiple fatalities, but we're going to have to go through and take our time and ensure that exactly what we have.
Neighbors made a harrowing escape from flames early Thursday after a plane crashed into the Murphy Canyon military housing community. Residents rushed door to door. Local officials praised the community's swift response during the crisis. The cause of the crash remains under investigation. Let us listen in to what the public information officer from the emergency services had to say.
Entonces, poquito antes de las 4 de la mañana fue cuando recibimos la llamada de lo que ocurrió aquí. Entonces, al llegar los bomberos, los rescatistas encontraron el impacto aquí de la avioneta en la casa y en varios vehículos aquí por la calle. Estaban todos en fuego, las llamas y el olor al combustible, como estás viendo ahorita.
The crash, which tragically claimed the lives of the music talent Agent and several others on the flight, sent shockwaves through the neighborhood of U.S. Navy-owned housing. The impact caused a home to burst into flames, with half a dozen vehicles also igniting. Let's listen to a resident's account of what happened that night.
Yeah, at first I thought, I wasn't sure. The initial one, I'm like, is there a bomb? Something happened, and then there was one initially, and I'm like, is that a gunshot? And then once that just started happening one after another, there was about maybe 4 to 5 when I was upstairs. And by the time I came down here, I wasn't keeping count. You were just hearing random explosions. And now that I see, it was the cars exploding. So.
Now we move on to the Middle East. Iranian and U.S. negotiators will meet in Rome today for the 5th round of nuclear talks, the highest level of contact since the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal under President Donald Trump. The discussions follow a public disagreement over Tehran's uranium enrichment levels. Iran's top diplomat Araghchi said yesterday that deep divisions remain with the U.S. ahead of nuclear talks, warning no agreement is possible if Washington demands Iran halt uranium enrichment. Let's listen in to what Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said.
هنوز اختلافات بنیانی بین ما وجود داره. طرف آمریکایی همونطور که خودشون گفتن در مصاحبات و گفته‌هاشون اصولاً به غنیسازی در ایران اعتقادی ندارن و معتقدن که غنیسازی باید به طور کامل متوقف بشه.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, speaking to reporters in a briefing, said the two leaders, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, discussed progress in a potential Iran nuclear deal during a productive White House call. Listen to what White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt has said.
The President spoke to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. They had a productive discussion. They discussed many things, including, of course, the tragic shooting that took place here in Washington, D.C. last night. But they also did talk about a potential deal with Iran, which the President believes is moving along in the right direction. And as the President told me, and he's told all of you, this deal with Iran could end in two ways. It could end in a very positive diplomatic solution, or it could end in a very negative situation for Iran. So that's why these talks are taking place later this week.
The U.S. represented by Envoy Steve Witkoff insisted it could not authorize even 1% enrichment, a stance Iran calls a red line under its non-proliferation treaty rights. Iran seeks sanctions relief to ease its battered economy and insists enrichment will continue. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that no deal is possible if the U.S. demands a halt to enrichment, but expressed openness to more inspections. Iran currently enriches in uranium to 60%, far above the 2015 Accord's 3.67% cap, but below weapons-grade levels. The talks precede a June International Atomic Energy Agency meeting and come amid concerns of possible Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. European signatories warn of snapback sanctions if Iran violates the deal, a move Tehran said could escalate tensions irreversibly. For the first time in more than 2 months, humanitarian aid is trickling back into Gaza, but United Nations officials warn the limited supplies nowhere near enough to avert a deepening humanitarian catastrophe. Over 90 trucks carrying flour, baby supplements, and other basics entered southern Gaza, the first aid delivery since Israel imposed a total blockade on March 2nd. Officials say more trucks are expected today, but aid agencies warned that volume and access remain insufficient. The United Nations says 80% of Gaza is now under evacuation orders or militarized zones, pushing millions into overcrowded shelters amid severe shortages of food, clean water, medicine, and fuel. The head of the World Health Organization made an emotional plea for Israel to show mercy, saying peace is in Israel's own interest. WHO officials report that now only 19 of Gaza's 36 hospitals remain operational, most under extreme conditions. Multiple facilities have been struck or forced to shut down in recent days. Additionally, on the domestic front, protests are taking place in Tel Aviv, calling on the Israeli government to end the war in Gaza. The protesters are also calling for the release of hostages and elections to be held in Israel. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused the leaders of France, Britain, and Canada of emboldening Hamas by criticizing Israel's latest operations. Let's listen to his comments.
I could never understand how this simple truth evades the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, and others. They're now proposing to establish a Palestinian state and reward these murderers with the ultimate prize. Well, for 18 years, we had a de facto Palestinian state. It's called Gaza. And what did we get? Peace? No. We got the most savage slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. They want Israel to stand down and accept that Hamas's army of mass murderers will survive, rebuild, and repeat the October 7th massacre again and again and again, because that's what Hamas is vowed to do.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has named a new domestic security chief, openly defying the country's Attorney General. In a statement, the Prime Minister's office announced the appointment of Major General David Zinai as the next head of the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence service. The decision comes just one day after the Israeli Supreme Court ruled the dismissal of current Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar as unlawful. Israel's Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara had previously warned Netanyahu not to proceed with any new appointment, citing a potential conflict of interest. Following the announcement, the Attorney General said that the appointment process was flawed. Israel's main opposition leader, Yair Lapid, urged Major General Zini to reject the appointment until the Supreme Court rules on its legitimacy, accusing Netanyahu of acting under a cloud of conflict of interest. An Israeli airstrike has hit a building in southern Lebanon after Israel's military warned residents to evacuate areas connected to Hezbollah militants. Despite a ceasefire agreement reached last November to halt over a year of hostilities, Israel has continued its airstrikes on Lebanon. While the Israeli military did not confirm the airstrike on the southern town of Toul, it reported carrying out multiple attacks on Hezbollah targets, including the killing of one militant. Lebanon's national news agency reported that Israel struck a building in Toul, where the military had issued an evacuation warning for people living within a 500-meter radius, indicating the area's connection to Hezbollah. Israel's warning, broadcasted in Arabic, urged residents to evacuate immediately, citing nearby Hezbollah facilities. No immediate reports of casualties have emerged from the strike in Toul. In a separate operation, the Israeli military has said it had targeted and eliminated a Hezbollah militant from the Radwan force in the nearby Rab el Talatin area, located about 17 kilometers southeast of Toul. The national news agency reported a martyr from another airstrike in the same region, but did not specify their identity. Additionally, Israel's forces struck several Hezbollah military sites, including weapons storage and rocket launchers in the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon. The military insists these actions are a response to violations of the November ceasefire, which called for Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River and dismantle military infrastructure in the south. Israel, in turn, was expected to pull out its troops, although it has maintained forces in 5 areas it considers strategic. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam condemned the Israeli airstrikes, calling them repeated aggressions against Lebanon at a critical moment as municipal elections are set to take place in the south. Despite the surge in Israeli strikes, Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem urged supporters to go out and vote, aiming for a resounding victory in the upcoming elections. Now we move on to Europe. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has signed a landmark deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, ending decades of dispute. The agreement, backed by the US, allows the UK and America to maintain their military base on Diego Garcia, with the UK paying Mauritius €101 million annually for 99 years, totaling around €3.4 billion. The deal follows a High Court ruling overturning a last-minute legal challenge by 2 Chagosian women who they say they were forcibly exiled. Starmer argued that the agreement secures national interests and prevents rival powers like China from gaining influence. Mauritius hailed the accord as the final step in its decolonization. Critics, including the UK Conservation Party and some Chagosians, accused the government of betraying their rights and identities. Parliament will scrutinize the agreement before ratification, and a 24 nautical mile buffer zone will protect UK control around the base, which has strategic value for Western defense. Let's listen into what Prime Minister UK Starmer had said.
A few moments ago, I signed a deal to secure the joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia. This is absolutely vital for our defence and intelligence, and therefore for the safety and security of the British people. The full assessment of why this is so important is highly classified, but I want to speak as frankly as I can. The strategic location of this base is of the utmost significance to Britain, from deploying aircraft to defeat terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan, to anticipating threats in the Red Sea and the Indo-Pacific. The base is right at the foundation of our security and safety at home.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.